titled Growing Food in an Allotment. We're really happy to see that so many people joined us today to hear Marta, Rosie and Jade talk about allotment gardening. This is a really good time to do this webinar, I think, because during the lockdown, lots of people got into gardening and the demand after allotment plots has increased. Plus, it's springtime, even though it doesn't look like it right now, which is ideal for starting with your vegetable and fruit growing. So we hope you enjoy this webinar, and we hope that you learn some useful information, some tips and tricks, and start to grow your own food. So just before we start, a few things to help you navigate if you're new to Blackboard. There's a purple icon at the bottom right corner of the screen. When you click that, you can get to the chat pane where you can chat with the other attendees. And also, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the chat and our team will be collating the questions, and then there will be time set aside at the end of the webinar to address them. You might have noticed your microphones are muted by default, but if you have a question, again, type it into the chat and then we'll get to answer it later. Also, there are some more icons at the bottom of your screen in the middle. If we unmute you in the end at the Q&A session, that's where you can access your microphone and camera. Also, there is a raised hand icon on the right, which you can use if you have questions in the Q&A session. And before we start, just very, very quickly, I would like to introduce you to the project behind this webinar, which is called Sheffield. It's a project born at the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures at the University of Sheffield. And the aim of the project is to raise awareness about how to grow your own food and why it is important to do that. You might have been to one of our previous webinars, or maybe you have seen our website. There are links in the chat to the website if you want to visit. And yeah, we do webinars, we post blog articles, sustainable food recipes, and other resources on the website. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And if you yourself grow your own food at home and you would like to share this experience with us, we would be really happy if you could contact us at the email address you can see on the screen. We're also accepting blog entries for our website related to your experience with growing food, or anything else related to sustainable food and new vegan recipes and things like that. So if you're interested in contributing to our project, please contact me at the email address you can see on the screen. And before we start, oh yeah, there's one more thing. We have a newsletter as well, so you can sign up for the newsletter if you want. There is, or should be, a link in the chat for that. And before we start, there is a quiz, and I hope you all like quizzes, because I really do, and it's a fun way to get us started. If you open a new window in your browser, or you go on your phone and you go to menti.com and you use the code that you can see on the screen, then you can access the quiz. I'm just going to give you a few seconds to do that. I can also put that link in the chat, or maybe someone from the team, yeah, already did that. So it's menti.com. I'm just going to stop this right now because I need to share my screen in order to be able to do the quiz. Just a second. Share application. Right, okay, so just a few more seconds before everyone gets to the website. It's menti.com and you use the code 27131913. I see people getting there. I'm just going to give you a few more seconds so you can get there. Right, so if we're ready to start, let's start now. So the first question, what's the first thing you will do once the lockdown is over? I think this is a question that everyone will be very happy to answer, probably. So we'll see what people will say. Hug my friends, that's a good one. I'm definitely going to do that. Haircut, everyone needs that. Pub, party, visit my parents, spend time with my granny, meet friends, which is a lot of hugging here, a lot of meeting friends and family, invite people over, Travel, museums and art galleries. I definitely miss that. Swimming, camping. I think you can do camping now even already, but maybe it's too cold for that. Eat ice cream, charity shopping, dinner parties, get a massage. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Visit and travel in the UK, go for walks, eat out. Yeah, that's we can do that actually next week, can't we? I can't wait for that. Roll around with grandchildren. That's a nice one. Go to theater. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for answering. I think it's nice to kind of share what we will all do once this is over, hopefully forever. Okay, so the next question is, if you're growing your own food, what would you say is the easiest or the most low maintenance crop that you grow? Let's see what people have to say. I'm really interested in the answers. So the bigger the letter is on this word map, the more people answered that. So as you can see, potatoes, people usually think potatoes are the easiest crops to grow. Rhubarb, runner beans, lettuce, okay, raspberries. I think potatoes are definitely the winner here. So this is good to know for me as well, because I'm starting with my own vegetable garden. Potatoes are a good thing to grow. That's good to know. Thanks, everyone. Let's see if our speakers later will agree with that. I'm sure they will. Potatoes sound quite easy, don't they? So the next question, which are the most exotic crops that you grow or would like to grow if you're not growing anything right now? Ginger, pineapple, wow, poblano peppers. I don't even know what those are. Probably something really spicy. Chili peppers, grapes. Yeah, grapes. I guess that's not easy to grow, is it? Asparagus, strawberries. Cool. Ginger looks like it's the winner here as well. People want to grow or are growing ginger. And grapes and chili peppers. Cool. Pumpkins. Vietnamese mint. Very cool. I didn't know that's like a special kind of mint, probably. Pineapple. Tromboncino. I don't know what that is. Maybe someone wants to explain that in the chat. Melon. String of dolphins suckle. I don't know what that is either. I have a lot to learn. Okay, next question. This is kind of to gauge what people are at before we even start talking about allotments. So have you got an allotment, or are you on a waiting list, or do you have a garden, or none of the above? Cool. So it looks like so far it's very close between people who have an allotment plot and people who have a garden, which is great. You came to the right place. You're gonna hopefully get some advice today about how to, you know, make it better maybe, or some useful tips and tricks for, you know, having a better harvest. Some people are also on a waiting list for allotment and growing inside their apartments. That's also good. Cool, thank you very much. And next question. Do you have shared resources at your allotments, such as pots and tools and things like that? If it is not applicable to you because you don't have an allotment plot, you can choose that as well. Yes, so far it looks like more people don't have shared resources at their allotment, but there are 13 people who do. Interesting. I think we're going to talk about that as well later. One of our speakers will touch that subject as well. Yeah, it looks like most people don't have shared resources. Okay, good to know. Next question. Do you make your own compost? I guess there's an easy yes or no answer here. Oh, wow. A lot of people make their own compost. This is really cool. I need to start doing that, actually. So yeah, I'm sure we're also gonna hear some advice about that, but maybe you don't need it. Everyone makes their own compost. This is amazing. Cool. Next question. Oh yeah, now we're getting to a competition. We have 3 questions that you can kind of compete. The faster you answer, and obviously if the answer is correct, the more points you get. So let's get to it. First question, what are the best friends of allotment growers? You have 20 seconds to answer. Is it slugs, birds, earthworms, ants, or squirrels? Oh, yay! Looks like everyone knows it's earthworms, almost everyone. Birds are also good friends of allotment growers, I'm sure, but earthworms definitely win. Cool. Let's move on to the next question. Oh yeah, sorry, it's gonna show who's got the most points. Dragonite. Cool. Next question. So the Three Sisters combination features which 3 plants? You have 20 seconds again. I'm not gonna name them all because I don't want to disturb your thinking process. The Three Sisters combination. Time's up. Right, so it looks like most people got it right. It is actually sweet corn, beans, and squash. So apparently these 3 crops kind of complement each other when you're growing them close to each other. I'm sure Marta, who is our first speaker, will be able to tell you more about that because she's the one who suggested this question. I can't speak more about this because I don't know how exactly they complement each other, but apparently it's good to grow them together. So who got it right? Who's got the most points? Cool, looks like we have a new leader, Barney. Great, and the last question is, which of these crops is the hardest plant to grow in the world? So is it beetroot, wasabi, pineapple, artichoke, or cauliflower? Time's up. Let's see if you got it right. Okay, cool. So a lot of people chose wasabi, which is the correct answer. So yeah, apparently, according to this BBC article that I found, wasabi is actually deemed by experts the hardest plant in the world to grow. If you're interested, I can send you that article. Yeah, so that's it. And I think this was the last question. Let's see how people fared. Cool, Langmate looks like is our winner. We don't have any prize, but you can feel really good about yourself. Thank you for playing, everyone. And yeah, without further ado, let me stop this. I will now bring up Marta's presentation, which is our first speaker. And let's see. Right, so our first speaker is Marta Crispo, a Grantham Center for Sustainable Futures final year PhD student, who will talk to you about some tips to get you started and cultivate your own veggies. Marta is a part of a research group focused to investigate the ecosystem services and benefits that allotment promotes in cities. And part of her research also involved visiting 200 plots across 10 cities in the UK to collect soil and plant samples and investigate soil quality and health in terms of pollutant and black carbon. So Marta, if you can hear me, which I hope you can now unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see you. Great.
Okay, thank you, Jana, and welcome everyone, and thanks for coming tonight. So yes, as Jana was saying, I'm part of this research group, and I think thanks to the opportunity that I had of visiting so many allotments and also meeting so many allotment owners, that I really got excited to have in my own plot. And tonight I would like to share with you some tips and experience that I learned on having my own allotments, and hopefully you will find it helpful for you to also start your own grow and also be part of a growing community of urban growers. Before starting, I felt important to say that actually the allotment, there's no one correct way of having the allotment, or there is no one way of having allotment, but it should be really, it's your own place, so it should be really a place where you grow what you actually most enjoy eating, and it's also a place where you should grow something that really make you feel happy. So here I just collect a picture that I got from visiting different allotments, just to give you an idea how different people experience their allotments. So for instance, I remember a few people having half of their plot dedicated to keeping animals, like ducks for having their own duck's eggs. People even building their own beehives to make their own honey. A lot of people enjoying having a pond for the wildlife that it brings around. A lot of people experiment in many different ways of growing crops, and also different type of crops. And I think the cutest one was this old guy having half of his plot dedicated to breed dahlia, so he could have a fresh cut of flower for his wife every morning. So yeah, the allotment is your own place, so it should be really your way to grow and love the nature, but always, I always think, is respect of the environment and the growers next to you. Another thing that came up often when you speak with people that perhaps don't have an allotment, or they have a little experiences in growing, is they often feel a bit scared or daunting, or they really don't know where to start with an allotment. And I think it's really important to realize that when you're part of an allotment, you're actually part of a community, so you're not alone, and there's many ways this community can actually support you. So for instance, a lot of allotment sites would have a manure day where you could get a lot of fresh and smelly manure for really cheap price. There's often a plant sale, which basically usually it's when the growing start season begin, and you can get a lot of ready to transplant plant to put directly on your beds. There's often a seed swap event where you get a lot of either free seeds or really cheap seeds, and you can get to know really curious and different varieties of different vegetables. And there's often people just sharing information and opportunity for recycling material to really to build your own infrastructure in the allotments. And of course, this grower community is also full of people that are really passionate, and they love, like me, speaking always and always about plants and growing. So it's really a place where you can actually ask to your neighbor or ask to the digital community a lot of questions, a lot of tips, or how to best grow a vegetable, or which is the best way to cope with a certain pest, or just ask like identification for different weeds or for different plants. And it's also a place to get a lot of inspirational and creativity idea, like making your willow basket, or having a new type of drinks from different flowers, and also just build your own pizza oven. But getting a bit more into the actual, the more technical details, or the more practical details, I think is that when you get a piece of land or an allotment or your own garden, or even a small patio, I think the most important thing is really to spend time on observing and planning. And this can be done usually if you have an allotment in the most quiet season, so usually around January, December, February. And you should really spend time observing your plot in terms of what is the space available, so how much space you actually have available for your own crops to grow. How much sunlight do you have? So really have a look over the course of the day, how the sun move across your plot. Do you have any shade area? Is this because you have a lot of tree? Can you cut down this tree? Can you lower down any fence? Is there something that you can do to improve the sunlight in your plot? Do you have any inherited plants? Often you will get a lot of perennial plants. Do you want to keep them? Do you want to move them? Which are those inherited plants? And of course, it's really important to look at your soil. So what is this? What is the texture of your soil? Is it a really light soil, or is quite hard and compacted? How you can improve this soil texture? How is it drainage? Do you have a lot of waterlogged area and a lot of wet patches? Can you do something about it? What you can do about it? And I think that based on all these observations, you can actually then plan accordingly your plot layout. So, for instance, decide really taking a piece of paper and a pen, and really lay out where is the best position to put your beds, which type of crops you want to grow, whether you want to have a crop rotation scheme. If you have a lot of shade, you can think of those crops that are more that tolerate more the shade. Do you want to invest in a polytunnel or in a greenhouse? Do you want to make your own compost? In those really if you have a really wet area, waterlogged area, why don't think transforming this area in an actual pond? And of course, don't forget to include your sitting area, which you will really just enjoy looking at your own garden. In terms of beds, I think here there are many possibilities, and it really depends on your times and it's really up to you. But I think the cheapest and the easiest way is actually to just use your own soil, the soil that you have on your plot, and just sow directly on this soil, or transplant directly your plant into your soil. However, a lot of people also like to experiment on raised bed or the no-dig practice. So you can even have like raised arm level raised bed. However, you have to consider that you will need to invest in a lot of compost and manure to actually fill up those beds, or all fill the no-dig patches. However, after a few months of growing, I think you will realize that anything, really literally anything, can become actual bed to grow vegetable and plants, like from bathtub to even pens. Here was just a slide to give you an idea what was the process that I followed to choose the layout of my beds, and just to show you how this can be really a never-ending process and always evolving process based on what you learn year after year of your growing. So I think the first factor that I look at was the sunlight. And I tend to put my beds on a north to south orientation to maximize the sunlight that all my beds would get. And then I had a lot of problem on my plot with slugs, and because of slugs, I changed the layout of my beds for 3 times. So the first time, I spent a lot of time on putting a lot of wood chip between one bed and the other, thinking that this would decrease the movement of slug into my own plot, into my own beds, and also decrease the movement of slug from one bed to the other. However, it didn't work at all, because of course most of the slug eggs were actually already into my beds. Digging with searching for more information, I found that there's a lot of herbal plants, but also flower like marigolds and different type of herbs. They actually repel or push away different type of slugs and also different type of insect. So what I did is really planting a flower strip at the edges of each bed. But of course, it didn't work. And speaking with all the allotment owner that I met, I think the best way and the best solution is actually to invest in a pond, which I still didn't have, but I think is the best way, because ponds attract toads and newts, and they will actually do the work for you, because they will feed on slug mostly. And another major battle that I had was birds, and I would mainly blame wood pigeon. My allotment site, or my site, is actually close to a woodland area, and I also have quite a lot of trees on my own plot, and those can often attract a lot of wood pigeon. And here I didn't want to invest in a lot of money to buy a netting, but actually it's something that I would strongly suggest, especially if you want to grow leafy brassicas, like different type of kales and cabbages, because birds really love them, and it really improved my cropping in general. So for instance, I didn't have bought any netting yet for my blueberries and raspberry, and didn't had the opportunity to eat any of my raspberry yet, because I didn't invest in a netting. One thing that I think is also important to consider, because we are quite north in England and the worm come a bit later, is really to try to think to invest on a polytunnel or in a greenhouse. This because really will extend your growing season, but also will expand the range of crops that you will be able to cultivate. So for instance, I got my greenhouse for only £50, and thanks to it I got a lot of tomatoes and pepper. Didn't manage yet to get any aubergine, but hopefully I will manage soon. And polytunnels and greenhouse, they're really, they're not so easy to build, but there's a lot of people on allotment side that they have a lot of knowledge on how to build, and they build their own polytunnel and greenhouse from scratch, and a lot from recycling materials, and you can get really creative. So it's something that perhaps you want to think, perhaps not on your first season, but later on your following season. Moving on. So after all this planning and all this decision, I think it's really important to get really active, get to your allotment, and really put in practice all these ideas. So for the plot preparation, part, this usually you will see that allotment sites start to get really busy between February, March, April. And this is really the time to start to lay out on the soil your beds, start to put up any infrastructure that you want to. And I think the main advice that I would give you here, and this is an advice that I was also a lot of allotment owner would give you when you are just firstly allocated with an allotment, is really to start a little by little. So for instance, start with just preparing 1 or 2 beds, in a sense of really clearing from weedings, from digging your soil, just on 1 or 2 beds of your plot. And this is because I think really marking the layout and changing the layout of your plots and clearing your beds and weeding are the most rewarding task of having an allotment, but they are also perhaps the most physically demanding task. And it can happen that after you've done all this work, you just arrive with no more energy to actually do actual growth. So I think it's really important to find your own balance there. And what you could actually do for the rest of your plot that this year you're not actually using, a smart idea could be actually to cover your soil. This can be done with cardboard or different weed suppressant membrane. Like for instance, here we have some geotextile. And this will really physically suppress the weeds, but also slowly kill the weeds, and you will really notice a benefit in the following year, how it will be much easier to actually weed those areas. Or you could even just grow directly on it, or make some hole and grow directly within those holes that you made within the geotextile. And then I think the next question is whether seeding or not seeding. And again, here, if you're quite newbie, there are different opportunities. As I said, you can buy ready to transplant plants and just transplant them on your beds, or you can, and I think this is the most rewarding and satisfactory things, is really to grow your own plants from seeds and really see them growing. You can learn a lot from about different vegetables and plants in general. And what a lot of people I notice do in Sheffield is mostly start the seeding indoor. This can be on a south-facing windowsill in your house or in a room, or in a polytunnel or in a greenhouse, and then transplant them when the plant is quite strong and it has a strong and well-developed root system. And this is usually done, so for instance, for tomato and aubergine, people here tends to already sow them in January and then transplant them when the danger of frost has passed. So for instance, last year was around the beginning of June. This year, I don't know yet, but the best way is just to ask to people that are at the allotment. But I suppose it will be somewhere in June. And for us, the rest of the crop, again, usually people start exactly on this time, even a little bit before. So between March and April, they start all their sowing indoor, and then they transplant most of the thing. But of course, there are some crops like potato, which indeed I also agree that they are the easiest, some of the easiest to grow. Shallots and garlics, they also are quite well tolerant to a bit of cold and wet soil, so you actually transplant them usually straight away in your soil during March and April time. And of course, I think before transplanting and sowing any of your plant, one of the most important things to consider is really feeding your soil. So really nourish your soil with a lot of macro and micronutrients, which will support the growth of your plant and keep also your soil healthy. And this is usually done on an allotment before the growing season, so somewhere in May, between April and May. And again, here you have many different choices. So the easiest one, but the most expensive, I would say, is buying compost. But as I heard, a lot of people already made their own compost, and I think is the most rewarding things. You will notice that on the allotment side, you will have a lot of green waste from weeds, grass, but also a lot of vegetable kitchen waste, and it will be quite easy to make your own compost. You can build your own compost bin, or you can invest on a compost bin, especially we are quite north, so it will be a bit warmer and will be much faster to have to make a compost. As I said, you have often quite cheap manure on the sites. A lot of people do their own liquid fertilizer. So from comfrey plants, if you will go on an allotment site, I think 90%, if I don't want to say, just boldly, 90% of the allotment would have comfrey plants on their sites. Or you can even experiment making your own wormery, which is also quite easy, from which you can get a worm-based compost and also a liquid fertilizer that you can again dilute and then use to feed your own soil. Here I just compile a list of crops that I saw and I experiment myself. I think they are the easiest to start with. I think the most satisfactory one are, and also because I just love them, are courgette and runner beans. You can get up to 5 courgette per plant per week, and you can get a lot of runner beans in a small area because they climb. Chard and kale. I love chard and different type of kales. I love cavolo nero. They really well tolerate quite a lot of shade, and they can be also grow over winter. Really easy also purple sprout or sprouting broccoli in general, and kohlrabi. I miss a picture, but anyway, turnip and rhubarb are 2 crops that well tolerate wet and cold soil. And if you have a polytunnel or a greenhouse, it's quite easy actually to have your own tomato or just on a windowsill. And lastly, I think once you got a bit more expert on growing your own crop, and I think this is something that you want to think after your first season, is really to think of a crop rotation scheme. This because you have to think that having a species richness above ground will increase the species richness below ground in terms of nutrients and also in terms of fungi and different microorganisms. So really will increase both your soil fertility but also prevent to disease build up. This is a type of crop rotation that a lot of horticulturists would suggest you, like National Allotment Society, the Royal Horticultural Society. You can also make your own, and you can even include cover crops or different type of crops depending of what you actually want to improve for your soil and for your own crops. And I think that lastly, for me, having an allotment is actually more than growing. It's really, it's about harvesting, but also being part really of community that try to be a bit more self-sufficient and is a part of a group of people that tend to be part of a more sustainable food system and more healthy food. It's a place where you can learn a lot of new recipe, and not only new recipe, but also a place where you can learn how to conserve your own food. You can get a lot of social and health benefits. It's a place, I mean, just to enjoy and observe nature, meeting new people, eating outside, learning how to cook on your fire, and just in general have fun. So I wish you all happy growing, and I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any question if you have any.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, sorry, I just realized my microphone wasn't on this whole time that I was talking. So sorry. I was just gonna say thank you, Jade. It looks like you found your way to the screen share thing. That's great, thank you. So just to introduce our second speaker, Jade Clarke, who is a student at the Department of Geography at the University of Sheffield, and she will talk about what has happened in the allotment that belongs to the University of Sheffield Allotment Society, the work they have done, and how the space has changed in the last year. And she'll speak from her own experience of building attachment, responsibility, and routine with the space. She'll also touch upon the permaculture philosophy and emotional aspect of connecting to land and nature. So now the floor is yours, Jade. Sorry, everyone, for my microphone problem before.
Not at all, not at all. That's good. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. Can I just confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you.
Amazing. Okay. First of all, I would just like to invite you to put down anything that you have in your hands currently, and just to put your hands out in front of you and just to look at your hands, and just look at the skin of your hands, turn them over and take a look at how they move when you wiggle your fingers. Look at the folds of your skin. When you look at your nails, what do they look like? What evidence of activities do they show? What can your hands do? What have they done before? Watch how your wrists react when you move your hands. See the flow and the mechanics. Now consider what's beneath the skin. Imagine everything that's flowing underneath there. Keep looking. Imagine everything that you've ever created with your hands, and imagine everything that you're going to create. Now take a deep breath. When we go into a growing space, we bring our experiences, our ideas, and our interpretations. We bring our knowledges. Notice that that's plural. We bring our bodies and our emotions, our senses, and the way that we might perceive what we sense. We might go into a growing space and see a tree and think, okay, it's a tree. But what kind of tree is it? How old is it? How does it interact with the sunlight? Does it create shade? How far do the roots go? When we go into a garden or an allotment, we expect to intentionally interact with the form and the function. We pay attention to what we do and how we shape and occupy the place. Our hands are an extension of the growing space, a component of the non-human life. In the garden, the boundaries between human and non-human become even more blurred. We become aware of this blurring of the difference between the inside and the outside, and it becomes even more vivid as we create the rituals and routines in the growing space. You should be able to see on the screen a map. This is a bird's eye view, and we don't often get the privilege of seeing a bird's eye view in a human way. But I hope that you can see my cursor. And as you enter the path here, either side of the path, we have 2 terraced beds. And then we have 6 beds here and a final bed over here. We have a compost bay here and a greenhouse. And also, I'm just going to have a look what's happening on the chat because I'm a bit concerned.
Sorry, it looks like they can't see your screen. So yeah, I can't see it right now either. Maybe it's just all black right now. Maybe if you try to stop sharing the content and then do it again.
Okay.
It's never happened to me before. Let's try it again.
Did everybody hear everything okay though?
Yeah, we did hear you. It just now suddenly went black.
Oh no. Okay.
So try to just share your screen again. I don't know why that happened. It's still black.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah. Maybe is your internet connection okay?
Yeah, it's on full.
Yeah, that's weird. I really don't know what. Yeah, it's because it's showing as if you are sharing a. Hold on, something's happening now. There's a white space right now, but I don't think that's what we want.
No.
I'm so sorry. This never happened to me before.
Marta
Maybe.
has suggested to try to share the screen, not the application, because presentations in full screen as app doesn't work.
Is it sharing anything now?
It's still black. Yeah, it's what Phoebe was saying. Are you sharing your screen or an application window?
Yeah, we're sharing my screen.
So try to share an application window instead. Maybe that will help. So instead of your entire screen, you just choose application window, and maybe that will.
It says it's sharing it.
That is so strange. We still see just a black screen.
Shame.
I'm really sorry. So I can tell you what we could do. You could try to send the slides to me, and in the meantime, we can go to Rosie's presentation. And then I know it's a big file because you told me it's a big file, but I think we have no other choice. So try to send it to me. I will then upload it to Blackboard, and that will definitely work. And in the meantime, Rosie can talk.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, I really don't know. This never happened to me before,
really
and we've done webinars. I have no idea what happened. So I'll just bring up Rosie's presentation in the meantime.
No worries.
Okay, so this is working, right? Everyone can see this.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, great. So sorry about this, guys. Never happened to me before. I have no idea what happened. But our next speaker is Rosie Dunkley, who is a master's student in plant science at the University of Sheffield. Her master's is currently focused on photosynthesis in grassland plants under different nutrient treatments, but has ranged from carbon sequestration techniques in agriculture to food quality in a changing environment. Rosie has worked on the student allotment for going on 4 years and has been a member of Sustainability Committee and Beekeeping Society. In her talk today, she will explain how to use your lateral thinking, to problem solve on the allotment and bust the myth that you need the right tools for gardening. She will also offer some alternative ways and methods of getting seeds while cutting the costs of growing your own. So, Rosie, the floor is yours now. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. Again, I don't know what happened. But Rosie, I'm sure you will. This will be fine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Right. So, yes. Oh, I feel a bit shocked by that introduction, but okay. Yes, I am a student at the University of Sheffield. I'm a plant sciences student, and I'm in my 4th year. Oh, slides. Can I do the slides? Ooh. Have the slides changed for anybody else, or is this?
Yeah,
Here we go.
they are changing.
Right, so I got into plant science by getting into gardening, which I got into at a very young age. Oh, it's skipping through them now. It's clicked too many times. Anyway, I'll just talk. But yes, these books were the ones that really got me into gardening because I got very interested in self-sufficiency at quite a young age. So when I did eventually reach university, I decided to pursue these interests through the societies available to me, which were Allotment Society and Beekeeping. I'm afraid the buttons don't seem to be working properly. Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's me in the middle and the left. But I was lucky because I got to university and suddenly I had these opportunities to pursue what I wanted to do. So I had the resources to go to the allotment. I had the resources to get trained for beekeeping. What annoys me is that a lot of people don't have these resources. So I wanted to sort of try and help you think around the problems that you might encounter, especially if you're just starting with a new allotment, because it shouldn't be expensive. It shouldn't be a barrier to you. Just for some context, this is the university allotment, and this is an old picture. So the shed is actually painted now. But as you can see, we've got a few raised beds. But a lot of the things that have happened in the allotment have happened on the cheap because they've had to with students. So yeah, I'm going to start from the beginning and try and give you some advice on how to make it more available to you, more accessible. This slide, there we go. So starting with the basics. You need seeds and you need plants to get anything growing. But as Marta's already talked about, there are things like seed swaps in Sheffield. Sheffield is brilliant for it, and I'm sure many other cities are as well. And communication with your neighbours is very important. You get a packet of seeds and it's got about 50 seeds in it. They don't need all those seeds, and most people are very willing to share. I would also really recommend growing seeds from your food. It was sort of slightly revolutionary to me, and it only happened a couple of months ago because my housemate left some lentils to soak and they germinated, and it was a bit of a shock that actually, maybe not to you, but to me definitely, that you could just grow what you are literally eating. And when you cut a pepper in half, you've got about 100 seeds. And a really good way to check that they will germinate is to soak them and see if they germinate. So on the right here, you've got, these are 2 sweet pea seeds, which you classically soak overnight so that they germinate, and then you plant them on and they grow much quicker. If you do this with seeds that you find, you can do it with chickpeas, you can do it with lentils, you can tell if they're going to germinate and if they're going to grow, and if so, then you can plant them and you can sort of reap the benefits afterwards. So I really would recommend you just sort of taking a step back from thinking I've got to buy like a £4 packet of seeds and start looking at what is available to you. Scarification. Scarification is when you slightly damage the outside of the seed and it shocks it into growing. So yeah, I mean, some people use acid, some you can just scratch it. soaking it is sort of a version of it. It just shocks it. From a plant science perspective, it's to do with responses, but it basically shocks it into growing. And it's a really good way of seeing whether it's viable or not. The reason you need to do this is some plants are irradiated if they're shipped overseas or if they're flown over. So yeah, if you check that they can germinate, then you know that you're not just, sowing a done seed. Anyway, I'll get on because I'm going to run out of time. Save your seed year on year. I'll come back to this one because it's particularly good for beans. But if you can make the investment in the beginning, if you've got an allotment, it's likely you're going to have a several year plan. So make the investment in the beginning and then save those seeds. Use them the next year to replant them. It's really, really useful knowing that you've got that store. And again, you can check if they're going to grow by doing this kind of process. Another thing not to be sort of forgotten is use cuttings. So things like mint, especially mint. Mint is actually a pest if it gets out of its pot. But things like mint and rosemary and curry plant, just two examples of things you can get from cuttings. So if you see someone with a beautiful rosemary bush, ask them if you can take just a sprig from the top, because all you have to do is take a 4-inch sprig, pluck out the top few leaves and put it in some soil, and it will grow roots, and all of a sudden you've got a free rosemary bush that you can transplant. And another thing, if you're worried about any of these not working, remember your perennials, because if you make the investment to do something like to buy a small apple tree, that's going to crop every year and you don't need to worry about it. And it's really nice having a plant will just crop. When everything else fails, when the slugs get everything else, you will always have apples. It's a lovely, lovely realization. Okay, so you've got your seeds and you've got your plants. Next, you need something to plant them in. Now, I'm really keen to impress upon you not to bother buying plastic pots or biodegradable ones. I'll come back to that. First of all, and I will keep talking about free cycle because it is fantastic. Ask people. There's a thing called free cycle where people give away stuff they don't want, and you can ask for things as well. And it is such a valuable resource because people give away greenhouses, they give away all sorts of tools. So ask on free cycle if people have pots, or keep an eye on it. Also postcode groups. For example, where I live, there is a postcode group for our region. So I live in Sheffield, so it's one of those. And I asked on the postcode group if anybody had any pots, and the response was overwhelming because people just hoard them. So they were more than happy for me to go and take them away. If you can't do that, things you are eating out of will probably do. So on the right here, these are a couple of pictures from last year. Juice cartons, you put them on the side, you cut the top off, brilliant. Margarine packets especially, because you need to make holes in the bottom so that the water can get through, so you don't drown your plants. You just put it on the lid and it's perfect. You don't need to be buying lots of new things necessarily. Quite often just look at what you're throwing away and it will do. Yogurt pots, mushroom crates, they're all brilliant. And also, insofar as tools, don't go crazy about making sure you've got loads. I would say that you only need a few core ones. You need secateurs, a trowel, a spade, fork, and some decent gardening gloves. And you can do whatever you need to do with those. You can then add to it, of course, but don't think, oh, I need to get a strimmer immediately. It's work with the basics. My point about plastic pots, I would not recommend buying new plastic pots, but if they already exist, this is from like an environmental perspective, if they already exist, it makes a lot of sense to keep using them and to reuse them. And I would recommend against getting biodegradable ones because quite often they are made out of peat and sphagnum moss, which really is quite a bad environmental thing to be fishing for because it's a carbon sink peat, so normally you'd leave it alone. So really go with reusing, because then that as soon as you keep using them and it's going to be more environmentally friendly in the end. Right, we're going one step up from pots and tools onto greenhouses and cold frames. Again, free cycle. There is a greenhouse on there at least once a week, honestly. You have to go and dismantle it yourself usually, but really look into that before thinking I've got to shell out this much money. It's not worth it. Have a look for free things first. On the right here, you can see quite a rudimentary one I made in my student house in the yard. And admittedly, it could be better, but it does the job. And many of these plants have germinated by now. This is just made out of pallets. and a couple of plastic sheets from my mum's work. But it really is that simple. If you need something, you can build it to purpose. And I'm not great at DIY. And this isn't the most structurally sound thing in the world, but it works. If you don't have the time, or if you really don't like the idea of making it your own, it might be worth investing in a small standing greenhouse. But don't worry too much about immediately getting lots of money together to buy all these things, because ultimately you will work with what you have. If none of these are available, grow your plants indoors in your house on a window ledge, and then just transplant them out, because that honestly is going to be just as effective. You're just going to have to move them around a little bit more. Oh, there you go. I would like to introduce to you the joy of pallets. Pallets can become your best friend. You can make anything out of pallets. So on the top right here is a pallet bench that's at the allotment. It was made before my time, but it's been fixed many times. But it is just perfect. You don't need to worry about it. Underneath is an admittedly slightly messy looking raised bed made out of pallets, but it works. And the lining is just made out of old compost bags. You can really just reuse. But yeah, there's creating potting tables. Use the wood for signs. They are excellent. If you stack them, you can make bug hotels. You just put lots of sticks in, and that just increases the biodiversity of your plot immediately. You can reduce the rat risk to your compost bins by putting them under your compost bins. Stops the rats getting up. And you can just use them for everything. One piece of advice: if you're going to get some pallets, always check that you can take them. It's always good to just make sure with these things. But yeah, once you've got them, once you start thinking about how you can use them, how you can fit them into the space, honestly, you can go crazy with them. Next slide. Sorry, my slides are going quite slowly, so this is why we've got to stop. Yes, get creative. Once you've got this space, and allotments are beautiful spaces because it's just someone's just put the work in, and they've basically grown themselves all over a piece of land. You really just put your mark on it. So I mean, it can range from just growing some strange things. So on the left here, I've got some chickpeas that were just in the cupboard and they grew and it was amazing. Plant those out, see what happens. You can do slightly interesting growing rotations and companion planting. So try a Three Sisters bed, see what happens, see if you can get the beans to grow up the sweet corn. Build a shed. At the allotment at the moment, we are midway through building a cob oven. The idea being we can all sit down there in the evenings and eat pizza. Post-COVID, it would be brilliant. But it's all about putting your mark on it, because it is a completely personal thing in allotment. And once you get into this mindset of I can start building things, I can start doing things, it's so easy to do. Yeah. This talk is in two parts. So that part is the work with what you have, figure it out as you go along. You can do brilliant things with no money. This part I'm going to very quickly run through for the absolute basics, your basic crop rotation and your basic greenhouse setting. I've talked to a couple of people about this talk and they're complete beginners, so I just want to sort of take away the fear by just going through some of the initial crops that are pretty much fail safe. Marta talked about crop rotations and her diagram was much better than mine. But basically, I'm going to take you through 4 that you can put into a 4-year crop rotation. And they are potato, legumes, onions, and squash. And if you have a greenhouse space, tomatoes. So I'm going to take you through those 5 crops. And we're going to, just so you can understand how they grow, what kind of things you need to do. Very simple crops. So to start with, we're going to be talking about potatoes. This picture was very kindly sent to me by a friend. Potatoes are tubers. They're very easy to grow, as everyone seems to agree. There are many different types, but they fit into 3 categories. And those 3 categories are first and second early and main crops. All this relates to is basically first and second go in earlier and are harvested earlier, tend to be a bit smaller. Main crops are your big bulky crop, but they can get eaten a bit more when they're in the ground because they're in the ground for longer. You've got your potatoes. The way you plant them is the same for any type. You just need to know based on when you're going to pull them up in the end. So you get your potatoes and you chit them, which is what's happening in the bottom picture here in I think a CD rack. But yeah, do it wherever works. You need somewhere light and dry. You just put them out, separate them out, and you put them in the light so that they start to grow from the eyes. And this just gives them a bit of a head start when you put them in the ground. Once they've sort of started sprouting, you put them, you can dig a hole, put them in, cover them with soil. You can put grass cuttings on the top to try and help the growth. But it really is that simple. A lot of people put sacks and things that they can move them around, or if they don't think they're going to be there for very long. But yeah, they grow up, and then you pull them up when they start to, either the stems fall over or they produce flowers and then fruit. The fruit look like tomatoes, but they are poisonous, so please don't eat them. Once they've done that, they are usually ready to pull up, and you can always just have a little dig and have a check. So that'll be your first crop in your rotation. Potatoes are great because they break up the soil. Second is going to be your legumes, which are in this example are runner beans. These are then put in because they then fix nitrogen in the soil and they make it better. They increase the nutrient capacity of the soil. So here you bake runner beans, really, really easy. Put them into some pots in April, May. They go up. If you are growing them on a window ledge, just be careful you don't leave them too long because they start going round each other because they're climbers. When you transplant them, you need to give them a structure. So here's one example on the right. You can get creative with this. And then as the beans develop, you just cut them and go. These are an excellent example of how to keep seed, because the way to keep seed from these is you just leave a few pods until the plant basically dies. They go sort of brown and crispy, and the seeds in them are usually viable for the next year. Incredibly cheap. You don't need to bother buying new ones. So that's your second element. Your third, and bear in mind with rotations, they can vary. You can choose what to put in. Potatoes and legumes, one after the other, are quite standard. And then the other two, I'm happy to people say I'm talking nonsense, but the other two are normally quite variable. So in this example, it's going to be onions and squash. You can do a range of things, including brassicas. Anyway, onions, you go from set or seed. Seed is pretty self-explanatory. You put the seed in, you wait for a bit, an onion sort of develops. What I'm going to focus on talking about is sets, because a lot of people don't know what sets are. Sets look like shallots. Basically, they're sort of like small versions of onions that you plant in, and they swell and you end up with the end product. So if you are going to plant seeds, that's fine. It's fairly simple. You just plant them, manage. If you're planting sets, you plant them with the tips pointing out of the soil, and you have to net them because the birds come along and they pull them out because they think they're worms, or I don't know. You do have to net them. But that is it. Then they're pretty simple. Onions are very thirsty though, so you need to give them a lot of water. Other than that, you can see them growing. They're really pretty plants. And you harvest them when you can see the leaves here, they're quite sort of upright and quite fleshy. When they fall over, the onion is ready to harvest. So you just put them up and you leave them in the sun, like in this picture here, just for a few hours, and they last for longer. But yeah, very simple, and they smell very oniony, so it's quite nice having them in the garden. Pumpkins. Now this is going to be the last quarter of my rotation. I love pumpkins, but they're also incredibly easy. These are fail-safe ones. Plant the seeds indoors or outdoors. Transplant into a large space. The only thing I'd say for squash, they ramble, so you need to make a lot of space for them. Once they have grown, they will produce these lovely yellow flowers. Also, just so you know, pumpkins, butternut squash, courgettes, rules are the same for all of them. Anyway, with these lovely yellow flowers, you can see a couple of them in the picture. They have male flowers and female flowers. They're not the same thing. Like normally plants have both in one flower. The only difference, you need to be aware of this, because the female flowers have the fruiting body and the male flowers don't. The male flowers only produce pollen. And you can leave it up to nature, but quite often it's best if you actually pollinate them yourself. And it's really easy. You get a paintbrush, you take some of the pollen off the male flower and you just dust it into the female flower. Ta-da, done. You've been a bumblebee for the day. But it's really, really easy. And I would be aware for slugs for pumpkins, and well, pretty much all of these, to be honest, because well, they really like pumpkins. Yeah, and these are quite sort of visually impressive plants as well. So if you're not sure what you want to grow, but you want it to be like boom, go with the pumpkins. Yeah, pumpkins. And then the last thing, this isn't part of the rotation, but if you have greenhouse space, I'll very quickly take you through tomatoes. Tomatoes, again, very simple like the others, just plant them indoors. They like a long growing season, so you can plant them a bit earlier. So this is one that I planted in February. It's currently growing in my house in Sheffield. But they're very simple, they're very nice. They smell like tomato as well. But they really like nutritious soil. So some of that comfrey fertilizer that Marta was talking about earlier, they love it. So put them on that. Just keep potting them on, so as they get bigger, put them into bigger pots so their roots don't get all stuffed up. And when you plant them into your greenhouse or outside if you want, they fruit less outside, but they work. Pinch, once they're big and bushy and they start to develop flowers, pinch the tips out, because this enables them to sort of concentrate their efforts into feeding the fruits. It's known as the apical meristem. Basically, it's where the new development goes. If you remove this sort of growth developing section, it then reassesses and starts like feeding the fruits. But yes, and you end up with lots of lovely tomato plants in your greenhouse. But that's just 5. So I mean, look at those 5, know that your basics. It's a good way to start if you're nervous about it or if you don't want to go crazy in the beginning. But there's so many, and it's this amazing freedom that you can just pick anything and try it. And it doesn't matter if it fails. Like on the right here, you have some rubbish carrots. I grew these last year and they were a bit rubbish, to be honest, but it didn't matter because I really enjoyed doing it. And I know now not to grow carrots like that because they end up being tiny. But it really is all about just deciding what you want to plant and figuring out a way to do it. And if it doesn't work, learn from it, because honestly, you can't really go wrong. I'd also recommend planting some flowers because it really does make it much nicer. So yeah, these are some guidelines. Last slide, I promise. First rule of allotments, there are no rules. It is your allotment. If you make a mistake, you learn from it. If it grows and is beautiful, well done. Honestly, it's your allotment. You grow what you want to, you do what you want to do. And these are only guidelines for the very beginners types. But yeah, I would really love to see how some of you take these ideas and run with them, because everyone is different. The second one is going to be reuse, reuse, reuse. Try to avoid buying new things because there's so much stuff already out there. Even if it's this newfangled environmental biodegradable blah blah blah, if the awful plastic pot that will never biodegrade still exists and has been used before and you're reusing it, you may as well. Because otherwise that's going to go into landfill and you're still going to be buying new things that have been processed. Adapt when things don't work out. You grow something, it dies. Don't try and grow the exact same thing in the exact same way again, because it probably won't work. And it's all part of learning. It's a whole ecosystem, your allotment. You're going to have to change as it goes on. Get creative. If you want to paint your shed, paint your shed pink. I'm sure the neighbours will love it, but just make it yours, make it part of who you are, because it is a very beautiful space. And be really proud of what you've done, because allotments take a lot of work, and it reflects back how much work has gone in. And really do just build a bench so you can sit and have a look at it all, because you really, really should be proud of yourself. Most of all, enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, you're doing it wrong. So I really would recommend you go out and you just have a look at things and think, what would I like to do, rather than what you think you should, because it's all about the personal touch. I'd be happy to take any questions, but I think I've gone over time. So I'll hand back to Jana.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was really, really interesting. So many tips on how to save and how to be more environmentally friendly, and building a bench is always a good idea, I think. So thank you so much. There was also a lively discussion in the chat. We will try now once more with Jade. There are some technical issues with the presentation, but let's give it another try. So Jade, can you please just click to that share content area again and share application/screen, and then pick the application window. And hopefully that should work. Oh, it's working. It's working. We can see the first slide. So that's good.
Okay, can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can.
Oh my gosh, it might actually work.
Yeah, and it's a
Okay, let me
PDF, I
just
see, so you
go out
managed to
here.
do it in the end.
I've managed to make it into a PDF. Okay,
Perfect.
so I'm just going to make sure that I'm showing it okay. Right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
If I have my screen like this, can you all still see it full screen or?
Yeah, we can see it full screen, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so let me go through this then with you. So I've already kind of done the hand meditation, so I think we'll skip that one. But thank you for participating. You should be able to see a map. Can you all see a map?
Yes, I confirm we can see it.
Fantastic. Great. This is a bird's eye view of the allotment. And if you can see my cursor as well, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Great. So you come down this centre path here and you're greeted by 6 beds straight in front of you. And to your right, which is to our left here, you have the compost bays. And behind that's the shed, as you've just seen in Rosie's talk as well. Thank you, by the way, that was an awesome talk. And then over here we have the greenhouse. And we have one little bed just behind the greenhouse, and then a berry patch sneakily underneath the trees over here. Across here we've got some beds, but as you'll see, things have changed somewhat in the allotment space. So I'm going to take you through the year so far and what has happened. So this was back in July 2020. So this is pandemic time. So most students who I think were part of the allotment society then had gone home. And this was kind of evident because the onions hadn't quite ripened to kind of like a big size. I think that was lack of water. And some of our courgettes looked like they'd been a bit thirsty as well. And a lot of things had gone to seed, which was great. However, I wasn't sure if I could save the seeds for many of these things, if they were F1 hybrid or if they were organic or heirloom. So we just kept looking at the space. I just went to the space regularly and just kept having a little peek at what was going on. The compost bays were a little bit overgrown at this point. I think that's giant hogweed hanging around there. And they were being used, which was great. People were adding to it still, but it was a little bit on the overgrown side. The greenhouse, unfortunately, had suffered from either weather or vandalism or a mixture of both. And quite a lot of the glass had smashed and meant that we couldn't really start anything off in there that was actually going to be kept warm or away from rain. But we've persevered and we've given it a little bit of a tidy. As you can see from the bottom left, we kind of had a little bit of a change to tidy it up a little bit. And as Rosie said, you know, there's so many resources here already. We've not needed to buy anything. The bees, as you can see in this picture, were feeding on or drinking some water that was in a random pot. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, we need to make a bit more of a long-term solution for their drinking. And there was plastic kind of everywhere. It was a bit of a heartbreaker. You can see in the middle picture there's some glass, and the plastic stuff had started to degrade and was, you know, showing us why, as Rosie said, you know, it's best to stay away from it. So we started going to the space a bit more. So this is August time. And in this bed here, we planted some peas. In this one here, there was potatoes already growing. A couple of them had started to wilt and look really sad, and I was confused as to why. But behind we had some amazing runner beans going, and the berry patch was just so productive. It was awesome. And you can see I made a bit of a map, and this is kind of an example of the sort of thing that you might make yourself. It's just, you know, very simple kind of descriptions of what's growing where. You want to have a look at that for a second, you can kind of see, and that was useful because when we were thinking about crop rotation, it was good to see what was previously in the beds and potentially how much nitrogen they had been using, or other nutrients, and whether it would be difficult to grow things in the next year. And we had loads of radishes that had gone to seed, and lots of bindweed in the back that had kind of taken over. And you can see behind my brother's head here, there's roseberry willow herb. I managed to cut that just before it seeded, so we left it so that it flowered, because it was a great source of food for the bees. But before it went to seed and spread, I cut it so that it wasn't going to spread anymore, because it can be quite a prolific weed. And here we just chopped and dropped. So stuff that was growing was kind of mixed in with lots of different weeds. I wasn't really sure what was what, so we just chopped it at the base of the plant so that the nutrients would then work into the soil again, and cycle back for the next round of growing. Around the edge of the plot here, there were these sort of beds already made that looked great, but had become quite overgrown, and the greenhouse just almost had a will to just be destroyed. It was kind of like constant glass cleanup, almost consistently. And we had the joys of finding out that we've got Japanese knotweed hanging around as well, which had been treated, I believe, by the groundspeople of Cree Flats. And we're keeping an eye on that because it sometimes needs treating a few times. So it's worth knowing if you've got any invasive species on your plot and learning how to manage them. So yeah, we made some good harvests. As you can see, the Allotment Society had done a sunflower competition. So some of the sunflowers had come up, and I'd just go to the space, you know, rainy day, listen to an audio book and just have a look at what was happening. And I noticed sort of at the edge of the beds where the concrete meets the wood, there's a great opportunity for, you know, using the edges really well and growing flowers and things here. Sometimes I've found that strimmed or cleared, but actually it's a really good thing in permaculture. They talk about valuing the edges, you know, trailing plants down the side of the beds as well to utilize the height. And there was just so much coming from the space, even though it, you know, had not been possible to look after it as well as usual because of the pandemic. So then moving into September, we started to mulch the beds with cardboard. This was mostly because we hadn't yet connected fully with the Allotment Society and we didn't know what people wanted to grow. So we just used sheet mulch of cardboard, and then that meant that anything underneath it was going to rot into the soil, like I mentioned earlier, and create some more nutrients for us and provide worms for all of the provide food for all of the worms and other living creatures in the bed. And at this point too, we started to encourage people in our networks to add to the compost bays, to bring their food waste down so that we could make our own compost and then add that to the beds and also supply people with soil to grow their own. So at this point, you start to see here we've taken a couple of the potatoes out, and there's some chalk on the floor where I kind of experimented with the idea of writing messages to other members that were coming down that we hadn't yet properly connected with, because this bed had red spotted millipede in, which originally we thought was wireworm, but one of the allotment members looked underneath their microscope at the creature and found out that it actually isn't a problem until they're in really large numbers. So that was useful too, because we were considering what we could grow in this bed, and because of the pest that's there, we're having to grow stuff that doesn't no root veg in that bed because they feed on the root veg. So they were actually feeding on the potatoes, and when we harvested the potatoes, they were quite heavily. So that was really useful to find out, and it's going to influence what we plant later. And you can see as well, like utilising things like tyres, making extra space for growing, and how on the edges there's lots of different plants providing all kinds of different habitat, and also fruiting as well. Although over here has now become a space where we can't really grow anything edible because of the treatment of the Japanese knotweed. So we tried to save some of the radish seeds, but I wasn't really sure if they would grow again, if they were F1 or hybrid or anything like this, but we've kept them anyway because it's really good practice to save seeds. And I've experimented a little bit with some kind of like signing on slate, and yeah, a little bit more about the Japanese knotweed. And previous allotment members are making a and present members as well, but connecting is just a little bit more difficult because of the pandemic, and we're mostly organising over Facebook Messenger at the minute, and we're moving into kind of experimenting with Google Forms, Google Sheets, and a Facebook group as well. So yeah, there's good progress happening in the space. Here we found that there's, you know, a pond at the end here and a pond here, which is absolutely awesome because capturing and storing water is so important, especially because we're fortunate here to have an outdoor tap attached to the student accommodation. But if there wasn't, then we would be able to provide water for plants and for the bees, and hopefully in the future other species too, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. We found that this is actually not pond liner, it's a kind of tarpaulin which is porous. So often what happens is the water does collect there, but it doesn't stay. So we're considering what to do with that. And here we have an engineers project that's been ongoing for a few years, but progressed greatly, and we're pushing to get this moving in a direction, whatever that direction might be, we don't know yet, because this space is so valuable. But there are some foundations here from where this was actually previously a big building, so it's really interesting that the space has actually been turned into a student growing area. And this is what it looked like in November. So we looked at the beds and we kind of cleared them all, and we thought, okay, we need a system to talk about the beds together, to understand what we're going to grow in them and be able to reference them, especially because we weren't able to be in the space collectively because of the pandemic. And I started thinking about ways we could make signs. So I would paint on slate. And also the red peg is to indicate that something's not ready to harvest. Orange is that it's coming into harvest, and green is that it's ready to harvest. So these kinds of ways of communicating with each other when we couldn't verbally and physically communicate were kind of even more important because we couldn't be in the space. So these actually didn't work so well, these broad bean signs, and it's part of that kind of embracing your mistakes and learning from it. Because the paint chipped off and ended up actually polluting, which is a massive shame. So here, bed 4, as you can see, like we've now got this kind of referencing system to talk about the beds. It became a lot easier to think about the space. Bed 4 is our wireworm bed, but it's not actually wireworm, it's the spotted millipede. And we put these potato lollipops in the bed, which were kind of like bait, and we tried to lure the pests. And I say that because they're not really pests; they're just, you know, an unbalanced species in the space. We tried to lure them out, and I put them in water, which felt very cruel, but we were trying to do it in a non-chemical way. But in the end, we've just cultivated fairly frequently to encourage the birds to eat the millipede. And you can see in this picture here, the willow is really big, and that's kind of a bit blocking of the light. But yeah, bed 7 here was filled with lots of stuff at the beginning, as if you can remember, lots of things that have gone to seed, and that was clear in November. We had so much plastic. We found so much plastic around, and that's been something that's been really hard, actually, emotionally in the space. And that's something that, you know, kind of encourages us all to reflect on, that connection to the space, and thinking beyond it, that, you know, using plastic or using any kind of material, think about it in 100 years time, and where is it going to be and what's it going to look like. So going forward, November, we've got our leaf mold. This amazing crate was here, so we decided to put any leaves that were raked up in there, and people started bringing down their plants and putting things in, and we really started to turn the compost heaps and think more seriously about these compost heaps and about how they could actually become, you know, quite a large scale waste closing loop diversion kind of scheme, where we're encouraging a thing called Compost Club, and where we're wanting students and hopefully also locals to join in order to compost their waste with us, and then we'll use it in the allotment and also give it to people who want to grow in their own houses. We also did a hedgehog survey to find out if there were any hedgehogs around, because there's a little hedgehog habitat in the far corner. We didn't actually find any, but it's going to be repeated, and hopefully over time we can track whether we attract hedgehogs with our activities. Fingers crossed we do. The berry patch was actually covered in weed membrane, and I really have a pet hate for weed membrane, because it's plastic and because weeds grow through it anyway. And if you wanted to use a sheet mulch, just use cardboard. It's so available freely anyway, that I just think it's such a fantastic mulch. As well, we're going to put bark in the area too, to over time, while bark is decomposing, it takes nitrogen, but once it's actually fully decomposed, it actually gives a lot back to the soil, and because it's bark, it really encourages fungal activity as well. More fungus is great for plants. So in the berry patch, we pruned the blackberries, and we're hoping to make a keyhole garden, which is an outer edge of blackberries and then an inner part which will have these little sections of different berries that can be harvested. So what did we plant in November? We put in some garlic and some broad beans, and you can see the space is looking quite different, and we took some cuttings from the brambles that we pruned in order to put them back in the berry patch in the next coming year, so that we can create that edge, which will hopefully act as a bit of a habitat for birds as well. The compost heap was really picking up by November. Lots of people started adding to it. It was great to see it, people coming down to the space regularly. You'd be sitting there and people come and bring their waste from the flats, and that was really exciting. The willow in November received its pruning, and this was done especially because a couple of the members expressed that they really wanted to weave bird feeders, and I don't have a picture sadly, but some beautiful bird feeders were created with the willow, and a couple of members are now making some furniture with the willow as well, which is really exciting. And the greenhouse, gets messy, gets tidy, gets messy, gets tidy, and it's just kind of a cycle like that. And here you can see the broad beans and the garlic over winter. They're happy, they're pretty good dealing with the cold. They're great for planting in November and kind of give you a little bit of a head start when you come to spring. You've got something in the ground already. It feels like, yes, you're on it with the growing season. And here we have some of those cuttings sprouting, which is really exciting. And the berry patch, you can see kind of the form of it. And a couple of people, these are two sisters who live together, so they were kind of already in their own bubble. Pruning what was actually a crazy berry bush. They did a really good job of that, and it was their first time as well, so it was a fun experience for all of us. Some of the broad beans didn't make it through, but I'd started some off in my garden, but my garden's really dark, so everything was kind of, as you can see in this pot here, like reaching out to the light. So they're actually an heirloom species that we've planted in and amongst these ones, which are just some seeds from Wilco's, and the garlic starts to really come out February time. And over here we've got rhubarb as well planted, which is great. Rhubarb is just an amazing, just continuous grower, and you can start to see the space kind of, you know, come back to life, and that's really exciting. And the edge has become like a mission now to create some wildflowers. We've taken out a heck of a lot of plastic sheeting that was actually buried underneath this area. But I think maybe it was put down as a sheet mulch, but had started to decompose into microplastics. But you'll see shortly that this space has come along quite a lot. So this is my brother here, and these are a couple of people. They have come down and cleared the space, and people come and have their lunch. It's really, really nice. And the idea is that this edge area will be really biodiverse, and be good food for the bees as well. Yeah, and our leaf mold now looks quite different, so it's really browning. I'm creating signage as well for instructions on how to compost. I know Rosie made a really good sign before, but it's faded, so we're working on one that I've been working on for a long while. And March time's so exciting as well, because you start to see what's been planted before, and there are loads of bulbs on the allotment that were coming up. So that was really nice to observe the patterns and, you know, see the contrast between the end of summer going into winter, where everything kind of just, you know, died down, and then boom, these colours start coming back up again. It's really beautiful. And this was our first time of moving Bay 1 compost into Bay 2. We're having this kind of compost system where you add to Bay 1, it goes into Bay 2, it'll sit there for 3 months, and then we'll put it into Bay 3 to mature, and then we'll be able to give it away and use it on the site as well. And already this pile of Bay 1, you'll see shortly, has become quite big again. So you can just see here just some of the progress with clearing the grass in order to stop it from competing with the wildflowers, because the wildflowers need a low fertility, but they also need to not be competing with grass. And we have all of this tarpauling that I just have no idea what to do with. If anybody wants some, let me know. And you can see the progress as it's going on. You know, we put the gravel that was in the engineers area in these tubs here, and then we fill these tubs up with water when they're empty, if the rain hasn't done it for us. And that the bees often drink from those, which is really nice to see, because they don't suffer so much from dehydration, but also they're not risking drowning as badly as if they were going into the ponds. The berry patch is being upgraded with a wall, so people are coming down and creating this wall as and when they can. And the shed's had a really good tidy, and it's quite important, I think, to have a tidy and organised space so that you can, you know, go in and structure your garden in that space. If you've got a shed, I mean, this is the first time I've ever grown in a garden in an allotment with a shed. It's quite a privilege, but it's so handy. And here you can see again just some of the progress. People sitting on the students' eat chair, just absolutely love it when people come down to the allotment. And either side of the steps as well, these terraces have started to boom with colour as well. So an overview of the space, you can just have a little look at it, see how it's changed from last September. It's quite different. Water is so important. We've put in a proper rainwater harvesting on the shed now. Before it wasn't quite functioning, but it's really useful for watering, and we've used it pretty much every time we've been down to the allotment. Having a water butt, I can't stress enough, is you know, one of the first rules. Although it says no rules, there are rules, like you go capture and store water. It's really essential. We've got some kale growing as well in between the garlic now. And I've upgraded our sign system from the slate with paint to a pyrography kind of burnt wood and then varnished these little signs, which are movable as well. And I'll just make loads of these as and when I can, just to pop around the site, because people come into the space and they kind of want to know what's growing, but they don't always want to initiate conversation. Because it is a public student space, we kind of want to encourage people to come in without them feeling pressure that they have to engage with people who are there. So yeah, you can see we've planted some peas, some beetroot, some garlic, broad beans, and we're using twigs and branches for the peas to grow up. And in the background here, you can see we've taken some cuttings from the berries as well, from our prunings. So yeah, this is what the greenhouse is looking like now. And inside the greenhouse is is a greenhouse that I bought a few years ago. I probably wouldn't recommend buying a greenhouse like this now, because they just break so quickly. But because our greenhouse just doesn't function as a greenhouse, I moved this from my garden to here, and it's just allowed us to start off a few bits. So we've got some courgette going and some runner beans going, and some herbs as well. And the compost and the trays are just there for anybody to go down. And we decided between us what we wanted to plant by filling in a Google form and doing a voting system of who wanted to plant, who wanted to grow what in the allotment, what people want to see. So carrots and runner beans are the next things to be grown. And you can see here, one of the members put some really nice bulbs. So as you come in, it's a lovely entrance. And either side of the steps, these terrace beds, this has now been pruned on the left side. It's curry plant and rosemary and sage. But the curry plant's just kind of taken over and said, this bed is all mine, thank you very much. And we're saying, actually, no, you need to chill out a little bit. So we've just cut back some of the curry plant and allowed the other stuff to come out a bit more. And this bed as well has got mugwort and all sorts of herbs and bulbs in there as well, which is really nice to see. The shed's a mess again, but it's all right. It's how it is. I think that's one of the things we have to accept when we're in, especially in the shared space, is that everybody's going to bring their own creativity to it and their own process. And it's so important to be willing to be adaptable to that. And here we go. So the wildflower patch is actually not going to be just wildflowers. It's going to have a mixture of dogwood, yellow rattle, which is a parasitic herb that helps to suppress grass. It's going to be a native wildflower mix because we're trying to do native as much as possible. Foxglove and honeysuckle, which is actually more difficult to propagate than I actually thought it was going to be. Starting off the seeds, they need to be cold shocked, and we're going to use some red clover as well. And over by the bees, we've emptied out bay 3, which had a lot of compost in there, to level off that area so it's easier for the bee stock to kind of get into the space. So we're trying to consider, who's using the space, what the space can function as in the future, and also getting a really good yield. So you can see here, this is the wall of the berry patch that's in progress. This is the second level, and there's going to be a third layer as well of rocks to kind of make it level and higher as well. And there's an ornamental in here that we're going to actually move. But from the other side, you can see this would have like this bramble ring around the outside, and then all of these lovely berry bushes in the middle, and you kind of go into this space, this little mini garden of its own. And in bay 3, we found loads and loads of these bags. We've saved what we could, and then what we couldn't has just gone into landfill. And we have lots of tasks in the base as well. It doesn't always have to be very physical. You don't always have to work when you go there, absolutely. It's there's also little things like shredding up some cardboard in order to balance the compost, because we get a lot of people adding their wet and green waste, but there isn't really yet the habit of creating the dry and the balancing kind of brown stuff on the compost to keep it so that it's going to function really well. And just going to check, can everyone still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, I'm almost finished.
Yeah.
So we had a really good meeting at the allotment the other day with a few of us as things have started to ease lockdown wise, and it's so great in the allotment space because it's outside. There's a really good scope for keeping connected, and for me especially, like, it's been a bit of a lifeline really, just being able to go to a space and being able to just sit in it and think, okay, this is a space that I can contribute to, and other people come down with so much passion as well. And we had a bit of a brainstorm about what we'd like to do. So the greenhouse is going to have, we're going to apply for some funding to get some perspex, and also find, free cycle and things like this. We've been looking on Facebook and things to find perspex to repair the greenhouse. Around the willow, we're going to put lavender, and we're going to remove the weed membrane as well. And each of the terrace beds are going to have a different kind of function, but a similar one. So the right hand side is going to be focused on teas, so chamomile, lemon verbena, mugwort, fennel, mint, nettle, these kinds of things. Mint and nettle though, we'll just put into kind of a tub and bury the tub, because the roots go quite crazy, and they really the rhizomes just will sprout off any kind of, if you cut the rhizome, a small amount of that will sprout a new plant, but they also just spread like a huge mat, so we've got to be careful with certain roots. And then the terrace beds on the left will have tarragon, oregano and chives, and we're focusing on cooking on this side, and sage and rosemary and thyme are already in there. Not thyme, but thyme will be soon. And the berry patch, we're going to put the brambles that we've pruned back in there, and also take the ornamental out, as I mentioned earlier. And you can see as well some of the paint has already come away from the wood for the signing, which is, you know, quite sad, because I know that all those sort of microparticles will be going in and around the environment. So we're going to wait until it's really nice and hot and dry and sand it down and go again. And going forward, we really want to engage with people who are passionate about ponds and creating spaces for water, so that we can pest control and also just create habitat in the urban area for toads, newts, hopefully, and you know, any kind of habitat that we can create, we want to. And you can see in the corner there's a little hedgehog pile. And we've used any kind of like rotting wood that can't be kind of used for any more projects, but it's just fine to kind of deteriorate has kind of got in this area as well. And this is sort of like this is a wild zone really. We don't really want to be going into this area. This is strictly for non-human habitation. Yeah, and that's kind of where we've come from and where we're going. And you can follow us on Facebook to keep up to date with our journey, as well as Instagram. And we'd also love to hear from anybody who wants to offer their advice or ideas. And thank you so much for watching and listening, and thank you for also persevering with the crazy technical difficulties. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Jade. This has been, sorry everyone, I know we've run over time, but this was just so interesting. I just didn't want to interrupt. There was so much information, and a lot of it I just thought it would be to the benefit of the attendees to just keep listening instead of me cutting you short, Jade. So it was really, really brilliant. Thank you so much. So if people don't mind staying a bit longer, you know, feel free to leave. But if anyone has any questions, maybe you can just raise your hand. That's easiest, and then I can, Esme, if I can ask you to unmute people. And you can ask. There is one question that's questioned in the chat. Natasha is asking if she can join the Allotment Society.
Is that the University Allotment Society?
I think that's what she means.
Yeah, it's absolutely free to join. The best way to join is to send us a message on Facebook or Instagram. And we tend to go down on Sundays and Wednesdays. Obviously socially distanced and being careful with the tools that we use. But yeah, absolutely, please join. That would be great.
Cool, thank you, Jade. So just looking at the other questions, waiting if someone raises a hand, but looking at the other questions, Nicola was asking Rosie, which pumpkin variety works well in the north?
Oh, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. To be honest, I don't know. I haven't grown that much. I live in Essex. So my advice to you would be try several different ones out and see. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer. I don't know if one of the other two will. I've never grown pumpkins in Sheffield. I'm trying to, so I can let you know in November. But no, I'm not sure. I don't imagine they would be that badly affected. So I can't remember the name of the ones. I think they're called like Maximus pumpkins here. I got them from a bit of a strange place, but they seem to grow fine here. But yeah, my advice would be get some seeds, try one of each and see what happens.
I think that's a good advice. Experiment is always the best way, isn't it? So another question we had, I guess, for all the speakers, Nicola was asking, she's got a 2-meter square piece of rebar mesh. Any good ideas of a good allotment use? She says she had it over a pond, but it poisoned the fish. Does anybody have any ideas?
Do you know what it's made of? Yeah, I'm not sure what rebar is. What's rebar?
So my partner who's listening, he's saying that it's steel. What is it? Reinforcement for concrete.
Right. I was wondering if you could grow something on it like peas.
Yeah.
Because peas are climbers, but they don't like sort of big spaces. They like growing around little things like chicken wire.
Right.
Yeah,
That sounds good.
Really. Or sweet peas especially, and then there's no risk of you eating poison.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that likes to climb around little things would be useful.
Or if it's flexible, you could use it. If it's quite tall and flexible, you could use it as a netting. Like build a netting system around your beds. That also could work.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I don't think there are any. Yes, Susan was asking about the waiting list for allotments in the beginning when Marta was speaking. So I guess she was asking other attendees, who is your waiting list with? Is it a unitary or parish council or an allotment association? But I guess people have answered in the chat. And maybe it would be useful if you mention who, what happened when you were waiting for an allotment plot, Marta?
Yes, so basically, unfortunately, nowadays, because I think mostly because of the lockdown and all the food shortage, there's about 300%, more than 300. The waiting list on the allotment sites across the UK is actually really high. So nowadays, before the lockdown, it was quite easy. So you would sign up on the city, on the Sheffield City Council, and you would just decide which allotment site you are interested. Usually the one closest to your place. And then after, it would depend if you would really be on a long waiting list or there would be no people on a waiting list. Then you would get you would receive a letter and then get allocated to a plot that sometimes you can choose by choosing by different one. Nowadays, what's happening is that there's really a huge waiting list. So the best things to do is just again go to the Sheffield City Council website and sign up on an allotment site that is close to your house, or it has a shortened waiting list, and just wait. Can be that someone drop out or no one is growing a plot, so they are actually kindly asked to leave the site. There are few also privates, but across Sheffield there are not so many. So mostly is I would say going to the through the Sheffield City Council allotments.
Yeah, and I mean, it is hard to get a plot, but as we heard already also in our other webinars, even if you don't have an allotment plot, it's still possible to grow food even in your apartment or inside of your house, right? We can either, use hydroponics techniques, or you can use it just your windowsill. You can grow something there, which is what we are currently doing, for example, because it's too cold to put anything outside. So yeah, there are a lot of other ways. Jimmy is saying in the chat that he found that the best way to get a plot is to speak to them weekly and keep your interest known to them. So that's also an idea, I guess. Cool. So I guess, yeah, we've run over massively. I'm so sorry, everyone. Thank you for staying on. And if there are no further questions, I think we can finish for today. And I'm going to send everyone a recording of the webinar and also a transcript of the chat, because there was a lot of interesting advice and ideas in the chat itself. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Rosie, Jade, and Marta, for speaking. It was really, really interesting, practical, lots of practical advice. I can't believe how much you know about all this, and you can really tell your experience. And thank you so much. And yeah, great to see you all, and maybe hopefully see you in a different webinar that we organize in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.